Winthrop Rockefeller.
Winthrop Rockefeller.
He's your favorite one, isn't he?
Well, in a way. He's the most unusual politician in the history of Arkansas. A successful politician. And perhaps in one word. I guess genuine. He was he was committed to doing something for Arkansas. It became the passion of his life to resurrect his kind of reputation, because he had fled New York City. He was part of the Rockefeller clan. He had fled New York City in disgrace because he was a notorious drunk and playboy,
gambler.
He'd married Bobo Sears, the kind of flashy B-grade actress, and then they'd had this big divorce that was on the front page of all the tabloids and everything, and he was a disgrace to the whole Rockefeller family.
That's why he came to Arkansas.
And he came to Arkansas to escape all of that and the notoriety after his divorce, and here he discovered his mission in life, which was to take this poor state and transform it into a modern state, and so that was his dream. And so he ran for office, and amazingly, with the help of a great fortune, of course, gets elected, and then felt like in the 4 years he was governor that he had failed, and so he died, and I think a very unhappy and bitter man.
He didn't live very long, did he?
He lived about 2 years after his defeat and got cancer and died.
You have a great story about him because of his drinking.
Oh, yes. All right. Well, that was the story I told because, and as a number of these stories in the book are stories that I revealed that I was a part of. And as a reporter, you're never supposed to be part of the story, and you try not to be. But there were several instances when I became a part of the story. This one that I think that you're referring to is as I've said, he was notorious for drinking. That was his reputation. And he supposedly, there were rumors going around that he had this vast trove of pornography up on Pettigene Mountain, and that he had all this liquor, these fancy liqueurs and whiskeys from all over the world up there. There were all kind of rumors like that spread about Winthrop Rockefeller. But we in Arkansas, this was a southern Bible Belt state, and drinking was not an acceptable thing in much of the state, and you couldn't sell alcohol in much of the state, and particularly in the governor's mansion. People didn't expect the governor would not be drinking in the governor's mansion, at least since Jeff Davis was governor at the turn of the century, and he was a notorious drunk, and people loved him for drinking, and so he called himself he said there were pint Baptists and quart Baptists, and he was a quart Baptist. and then the Baptist church expelled him. So anyway, Rockefeller, this is at the end of his first term, and he's running for a second term in 1968, and against a very formidable Democratic candidate, Marion Crank, who was the Speaker of the House of Representatives and a very accomplished and smart man, and backed by the Stevens interests and so forth. So it was going to be a very, very tough race for him. And because he'd been so far kind of unsuccessful in getting anything done and had kind of championed civil rights, so he was supposedly in deep trouble.
And it was early in the morning. He was making a speech.
Well, that's right. And so he called a special session of the legislature in the summer of 1968. The election is coming up in November. And he calls a special session of the legislature to get some things done. He's got a prison reform bill, and he wants to pass to try to transform this corrupt prison system.
And somebody smells alcohol in his breath?
Well, no, that's not it. So he's got all these big things he wants to do. So at special legislative sessions, typically the senators and the House members all gather in the House of Representatives, usually at 10 o'clock in the morning at the first day of the session, and the governor comes before him and addresses the session and lays out his program, what he wants him to pass. And so that usually happens kind of in the middle of Monday morning. So Rockefeller addresses the legislative session. And he was not a good speaker. He was dyslexic, and he had to have his speeches written out so he could, in great huge letters, so he could read it easily. And he had problems sometimes speaking, and he often slurred a few words and stopped and had to start over again and so forth. So he was not a great speaker. So he makes his speech. And so I'm covering it for the Gazette. And so typically what you do after speech, I'll go around to key legislators and ask them about the governor's program and what they think and what might he pass and be able to pass and so forth. So I go up to Senator Clarence Bell of Parkin, who was a big, powerful man. He was from Parkin, Arkansas, over in the Delta. He's a very powerful man, chair of the Education Committee, and in some ways the most powerful man in the House of Representatives. And so I asked Senator Bell about the governor's speech, and he says, "Well, I thought he had 2 or 3 shots too many before he came here this morning." Now this is morning. You don't drink in the morning, do you? So anyway, I write it down on my notepad. And Senator Richard Earl Griffin from Crossett is standing nearby, and he echoed that, said, "Yeah, people should be able to watch that speech. They'd be ashamed of their governor." So I go down a little afterward. I go down to the governor's office to ask for to get Governor Rockefeller's comment about it, to see whether he'd been drinking that morning. And that's normally, we don't do things like that, but since a senator mentions his drinking, then I feel compelled to ask him about it. So I get down to the governor's office, and I go into the front door of the governor's office, and as I'm going into the governor's office, Bill Connolly, his press secretary, is coming out of his office. And so I'm in the doorway, and my notepad is in my hip pocket. And so we meet in the doorway, and I said, "Bill, I need to see the governor." And he said, "What about?" And I said, "Well, I need to ask him a question." "About what?" And I said, "Well, Senator Bell said he had 2 or 3 shots too many before he addressed the legislature this morning." And so poor old Bill Connolly, just a wonderful, sweet man. And he said, "Ernie, I was with him all morning, and he had 1 drink." And so anyway, I said, "Okay." And so he said, "But the governor's going up. He's going up to Pettigene. He won't be back until this evening." So anyway, he goes on, and I pull out my notepad then, and I write his thing down.
1 drink.
Bill Connolly had the quote. So then I write a story, and it's the next day, the front page of the Gazette. Of course, the lead story of his governor's speech and the big program that he'd laid out. And down at the bottom of the page under 3-column headline, and I can still see it, the headline, and it said, Senator Bell says WR, that's where the initials were used in headline, says WR had, quote, 2-3 drinks too many. Aide says had only 1. So that was the headline. So anyway, so Bill Connolly's account later, he was at the house the next morning, and he's still in bed early in the morning, and he gets a call. It's from Tom Isley, who was executive secretary to the governor, later a United States district judge for many, many years, died about 2 or 3 years ago, G. Thomas Isley. So Isley says, "Connolly, write a letter of resignation and be at the mansion at 9 o'clock or some such time."
Wanted Connolly to resign from being Winthrop's
press secretary,
because that happened. Okay.
Yes. So Connolly said, "Why?" And he said, "Have you read the Gazette this morning?" And he said, "No, I haven't." He said, "Get the Gazette and read the front page and write a letter of resignation and be at the mansion." So Connolly goes out, picks up the paper, and there he sees that story on the front page, and his heart sinks. So he sits down and writes a little 2 or 3 sentence letter of resignation, and drives out to the governor's mansion. And when he gets out there, all the moguls are gathered there. John Ward, who was Rockefeller's communications director, and Marion Burton, and Bob Faulkner. All the brain trust around there. They were all sitting in the living room, and he goes in, and Rockefeller's not there. He's back in his bed. He's still asleep. And so they sit there and just chew on poor old Connolly for an hour. How could you do such a thing? How could you write such a thing? You've defeated him now. He's he's going to be beaten because of this thing. The people of Arkansas, the governor's drinking at the mansion. How could you be so stupid? And he said, well, Dumas didn't have a notepad. I didn't know he was going to quote me. And John Ward supposedly said, well, Conley, he's a reporter. That's what reporters do. They quote you. That's what he does. And so anyway, they stay in there and they just harangue him forever. And finally, Rockefeller, somebody comes in and says, the governor is awake. So they all troop back to the bedroom, and Rockefeller's sitting there on the edge of the bed in his pajamas, scratching his head. And they go in and he said, what the hell are you guys doing in here? And so Isley goes over and grabs the letter out of Conley's hand, takes it over and hands it to Rockefeller. And Rockefeller puts his glasses on and reads it, and he said, why is Conley resigning? And so Isley goes and gets the Gazette, and he's got it folded back to that little thing about my little story at the bottom of the page. And so hands it to him, and Rockefeller looks at it again, reads a little bit, and then he starts laughing. And he said, hell, I'm not going to fire Conley for lying for me. He knows I had 5 drinks if I had one. Now get the hell out of here. I got to get dressed. So that's what happened. And so the next day he went over to North Little Rock to talk. He had supposed to talk to the Rotary Club or the Kiwanis Club or something. And so somebody there asked him about how many drinks if he had a drink, and how many drinks he had before he got up to talk that morning. And so Rockefeller just kind of grinned sheepishly and held up one finger. So that's that story.
I love that story. Hell, I'm not going to fire him for saying I had 1 when I had 5. That's a good job.